for eating food, taste, like a taste. That the taste is from the word most probably 10, right? I presume. If you didn't take off the maaser, that food is not permitted to be eaten. And so therefore, if you bought from an uneducated Jew, if you bought the maaser, you would have to go ahead. Not maaser. You bought produce. I'm sorry. If you bought produce from an uneducated Jew, you have to go ahead and take, just in case he did not take off the maaser, because there was a minority of them did not remove maaser. So because of that, therefore, because of that, you would have to separate maaser. So the Gemara says we are on 23a3, top of the page. Massive Rav Amram. Rav Amram is challenging what we just said. We just said that the rabbis enacted rabbinic. The rabbis are enacting a rabbinic law. There's rabbinic law from the rabbis, like lighting Hanukkah menorah, and we say bracha on the mitzvah of lighting the Hanukkah menorah because the Torah tells us you follow the rabbis. And even though it's a rabbinic law, you can still say the blessing, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu, that you've sanctified us with your mitzvah, and you, God, have commanded us. And how has God commanded us? Through the rabbis. That is what the Gemara said, and we said that the Rambam, Maimonides holds that really every rabbinic enactment, Moni Joshua, is like you're fulfilling a biblical law when you follow rabbinic law, because the Torah law, the biblical says follow the rabbi. So when you follow rabbinic law, every rabbinic law you follow, you're actually following Torah law. Is that an interesting? And when we don't follow, in a certain sense, it's a violation of Torah law. So the Gemara says the following: Master Rav Hadmai, this food that you are supposed to separate maaser, because you don't know if the non-educated Jew removed the maaser, ma'arvin bo. You are able to use it even though maaser was not yet separated from this demai. That's why it's called demai. It's a break of Torah as a morning assignment. Da mai. What is this? What is in here? What is in this food? So you're allowed to use this food for eruv. Now we were speaking about eruv. There's two different types of eruv. One eruv we say is to unify the members of the courtyard, which we spoke about yesterday. If you have houses and they open up a little courtyard, then we said there's a concern that if you carry from the house into the courtyard, which the courtyard is a semi-private place, you might actually come to carry from the house into public property. And therefore, by each house giving a certain amount of food, and you place the food into one of the houses, it's as if they all live in that house. It's considered, it unites the people, and therefore it's like the courtyard belongs to that person who the food, and therefore everyone else is just sharing from that person, and it's not considered like a public, semi-public type of place. It will remind the people, it will make sure that the people realize the only reason why we can carry from the house into this courtyard is because we did this thing to create it like it belongs to, like the whole courtyard belongs to one individual. And therefore they won't make the mistake to carry from the house into what? Real public property. Is that clear? And then also, you could use this food, which was bought from an uneducated Jew, as to give towards this, to place in one of the houses as the food of the eruv. Similarly, if you're traveling outside a city, right? When you leave a city, you have a certain amount of distance that you could walk on Shabbat. You can't, Shabbat, you can't walk outside the city 2,000 amot. 2,000 amot is most probably anywhere from 3,000. Oh, look who's here. Boker Tov. So he's back and better than that. Saul, right? Saul is back and better than ever. And so we said you can't walk outside the city more than 3 to 4,000, between 3 and 4,000 feet outside the city, you can't walk anywhere from 3,000 feet and on, unless you put your food there before Shabbat, because if you place food there before Shabbat, then that whatever we'll have to see, I have to see the halachot exactly how much food, what food, then that becomes like your house. If your food is there before Shabbat, the people would place their food there, and that would give them another 2,000 amot to walk, gives you another 3,000 or so feet to walk. Meaning to say, if let's say my house is here, right? And let's say my house is the end of the city, right? Usually my house is not the end of the city. The whole city becomes like, yeah, it's considered like your house. You have the whole city to walk on Shabbat. As long as there's cities, there's people that live, there's houses in the city, there are houses, that's all part of the city. But once now, what determines the city's over when there's no houses for a certain amount of space? That means that's the end of the city. Then you got to start calculating. I got 2,000. I got around 3,000 so feet to walk. A mile is 5,000 something feet, right? So 3,000 feet or so, at least 3,000, a minimum of 3,000 feet to walk. Let's say is you know, it's not a few blocks. You have you have a certain amount of space to walk. But if let's say my house is at the end of the city, the house that is the last house in the city, and let's say I got 2,000 amot. I have 2,000, whatever the end of the city, whatever the halacha term, this city is over. I got 2,000 amot. I could go up to 2,000 amot. Let's say we'll call it 3,000 feet. And at 2,995, I could if I put some food there, then I got another 2,000 amot to walk, another 3,000 feet to go. So I just extended my walking abilities by, if I'm in the city, right, Mr. Abra, and I place my Eruv outside but within 2,000 amot, then I extend just another 2,000. Is that clear? So that is what I'm allowed to use this food. Now this becomes a practical issue today in the country, in the mountains, when you don't have houses all around. Someone was telling me, good morning, around, maybe in Lac Sheldrick, there's certain here of Lac Sheldrick, there's certain area in the mountains that there's a nice empty space over there, and therefore maybe the city is over. And you have to count a certain amount of space. You have to walk on Shabbat. Here was somebody just walking, not carrying anything. Just interesting idea that it would seem to me that what's the logic behind it is that the rabbis, now some say the rabbis wanted that the Shabbat should just be a day that I'm just going to spend the whole day walking. That could be a little bit, I mean, technically you're allowed to, if you're in the city, you can technically walk from here to where, you know what I mean? You can walk from here to Flatbush, to Brooklyn.
There, I killed it there.
Still on the top, I'm getting this out.
Flatbush to the Lower East Side on Shabbat. The Chabad walk
Take it
every
out.
Shabbat from Crown Heights. They're walking into Manhattan, and who knows what else they're walking on Shabbat. But that's within the law, because there's houses all over, it's buildings all over. It's not like they left the city. But if you will leave a city, you would have you can't just walk endlessly, right? That's a little about the law. So the Gemara says I could use this food, Saul and Ralph, that we're joining in. That if you bought food from an uneducated Jew, a guy like Saul would take off his. I mean, if you'd be in Israel, you would take off your maaseh, you would take off your truma, you would give to the kohen the 2%. The average guy gives the kohen the average guy gives 2% to the kohen. So he gave 2% to the kohen. Then you have to give 10% to Mr. Batesh on the screen, to Ralph. Got to give. Ralph was waiting for the 10%, but there were uneducated Jews that were not so careful giving their 10% to the Levi. And you can't now if you bought that food, that's called tevel, untithed produce. And if you would eat that without taking off, and it wasn't tight, it's a big problem. So the rabbi said, when you buy from an uneducated, even though the majority of the uneducated Jews did take off the 10%, but there was a nice minority that didn't. So because of that, to be sure, if you would buy from this uneducated Jew produce, you would have to take off the 10%. Is that clear, so? But now, even if you didn't do it, you're still allowed to use this food for certain purposes, even though you did not yet take off when you bought this food from an uneducated Jew. So it says umishtatun bo. Umishtatun bo, the Gemara says that also you could use this when you want to use it from some sort of eruv for also, let's say, the alleyways, right? Because there's also a halacha, the same way that we make a certain type of eruv of food to unify the courtyard and the houses, that people that we shouldn't that when you carry from your house to the courtyard, we said beforehand that the rabbis enacted a certain law that they were concerned that if you carry from your house to the courtyard is like a semi-private area. Multiple people use it, you might come to carry it to the street. So they said you have to collect food from the members of the courtyard and put it into one of the houses. And then it's like everyone belongs to that house. But the whole courtyard is part of that house. It's not like courtyard for many people. Therefore, then you'll carry from your house to the courtyard, and you won't make the mistake to carry from your house to the public property. So similarly, there was a similar type of eruv also when the courtyards opened up into an alleyway, and the alleyway opens up to the public. So also they had to do something to unite that all those courtyards and the alleyway to be able to carry from the courtyard to the alleyway. Also, there was certain type of uniting that they had to do. We're not going to go into that now, but you could go ahead and use this food for that purpose as well. Same way to unite the courtyard with the houses, to unite the alleyway with the courtyards. Now, umevarchen alav, and you say the bracha of hamotzi. You could say the bracha of hamotzi even though you're not acting properly, because you're supposed to go ahead and separate maaser from this food, because you bought it from the uneducated Jew and you don't know that it was tithe, because the minority of them doesn't do it, but you're still allowed to make a bracha. What does that mean? If you know, let's say a guy has pork. And sometimes in Baruch College, you get you see some guys. It's a shame today that by the Hillel, there are kids that come not kosher food, and if they have not kosher food, because they say a bracha on it. From the Gemara, it seems you don't say a bracha on not kosher food. A teva, if you have food it would seem, because here the chidush is this food, because most do take off the tithe, so therefore, based on majority, it's technically allowed to be eaten. The minority, there's an issue about the minority don't take off. So the Gemara says here, you're allowed to go ahead. Imagine someone make a bracha on what kind of bracha is it? Say a bracha on pork. Say shahakol on pork. Doesn't make sense. It's a disgrace. You're eating this food. So the rabbis didn't enact a bracha to say a bracha on pork.
If it's what's it called? Like nefesh, maybe or not?
Oh, very good. So what Saul is saying, if a guy, the doctor says the guy needs to eat pork for it's a life, but he has no other food or else he's going to die, so then maybe he could say a bracha on it. We'd have to look that up. But that's a great question. Meaning, or a guy, would a guy say a bracha on the pork if he needs it for his health, like with life and death, right? He's in danger. He needs the pork. We'd have to look that up.
I'm thinking about the hostages. What they're doing.
Right. So Ralph is saying, Ralph has a good point. Let's say the hostages, they have no other food. If they don't eat it, they're going to die, right? So would they say a bracha on that? Maybe I'll do a little homework to see what Saul will remind me. I'll do my homework. How do you like that, Saul? Well, okay. So then the Gemara continues. And not only could go ahead and say hamotzi, also mezamen olav, he could be used as part of the zimun, right? You have three people, and make a zimun. 3 people had bread. Technically, you can make a zimun even if 2 people had bread and the other person ate something else. Good morning, Nathan. We're talking about that the produce that was bought from a non-educated Jew, which the rabbi said you have to take off maaser, and now the Gemara says if you did not yet take off maaser, and for some reason you ate it, which you should not have done, you could still count him in for the zimun. If a guy ate not kosher food, you can't count them in a sandwich of ham sandwich. You know what I mean? You're not counting him in for the zimun, right? Right, Adam? Don't count the guy in. Meaning we're saying there's a total law that you have to, when you have your produce, you have your grapes, you have your grain, you have to separate tithe and you have to separate truma. Now there was a minority of Jews, uneducated Jews, that did not separate maaser. They took off the truma. They gave the Kohen. Kohen gets a small amount, only 2%. The average guy gives the Kohen 2%. So they did that. But they give the 10% above after the 2%, there were a minority of Jews that did not do that. Because of that, the rabbi saw there was a minority of Jewish people of the community that were not taking off their tithe. And now when you're selling the food, you're supposed to, if you're selling the food, you already prepared the food, ready to sell, you're supposed to already take off the maaser. So the seller was already supposed to take off the tithe. Now,
you can't sell something pre-maaser. I mean, like, if you tell somebody, all right, I didn't take maaser off.
I mean, we have to. Some things might depend. It could be that also has to be looked up. But there's a certain point when you bring it into your house, you bring the food into the house. There's a certain point that the obligation of maaser goes on it, and maybe you would have to separate it. You should know, by the way, if you buy produce, you have to be careful. The irony is, if you go buy Yafa oranges in America, what Israel exports, they don't take off maaser. They don't take off truma. And, there's certain and therefore you have to figure out. You have to know how to do it, or else just don't buy it. You want to support. There's a mitzvah to support Jewish companies. We spoke about that once. Maybe we're going to talk about it again. The importance of supporting fellow Jews in business. One of the biggest mitzvahs to give someone a job. I'm looking for a job for somebody, by the way, or to do business with them. So, but if you're not going to know, if you're not familiar how to take off the tithes of the truma outside of Israel, this is what they do on a regular basis. So they have the system very set up. So you have to be careful if you're buying peppers. Also, they have peppers from Israel they export peppers that find themselves in New York, in Manhattan. So you have to just watch out, on those produce, how to deal, to either you have to figure, look up how to exactly separate it, or you just stay away from it. Which obviously, if you could look up and do it right, then just avoiding buying it. But that is something that applies to us here in New York. So be careful. So it says over here, if the person did not, the one who bought it, the person who bought it from the uneducated Jew, so it's clear the uneducated was supposed to take off the maaser. And you bought it from him because there's a minority of people that don't take off the maaser, you need to take off that 10%. And what I recall is you need to take it off, but you could still eat it. You hear the interesting irony? Because why could you eat it? Because there is a safek, a question of money. Whose money does this belong? Does this really belong to the Levi? Because the non-educated Jew didn't give it to the Levi, or really he already gave it to the Levi. He already took off the maaser, so therefore I don't need to take off maaser. Just to remove the possible prohibition of eating food that wasn't tithe, I already removed. The tithe was already separated. But now it's a financial issue. Who does this money belong to? It's a financial issue. The Levi would have to bring proof that it's his money and not my money. You know what I'm saying? But it needs to be that separation. So the Gemara says, if this food was eaten wrongly, because he should have separated the maaser, the buyer should have separated the maaser, but instead of separating the maaser, he just ate it without following the rabbinic law. He still is able to be counted into the zimun. It's not like he ate pork, right? So you could count it, morning, Boker Tov, you could count it into the zimun. And then the Gemara says, "Mafrishin oto arum ubenesh mashot." When he separates this, when a person separates the tamai, when he separates the maaser, he does it even bein hashmashot. And before we say the word arum, even if he's not dressed properly, he could still go ahead and separate the maaser. We welcome. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for coming. So now the Gemara is going to ask the question: when you say a bracha, a blessing has to be said. You can't be undressed, naked. Saying a bracha, when you say a bracha, right? You can't be exposed, right? The pasuk says, "You shouldn't v'loyer lecha ervat davar." The pasuk says Hashem is, Hashem goes in your camp, and you can't see an ervat davar. And the Gemara, and we have a drasha erva when your nakedness is exposed. Davar, you can't have a dibur. You can't speak Torah. You can't speak Torah in front of if someone's not if you're not dressed, right? You can't. See, therefore, you wouldn't be able to say a blessing if you're not dressed, right? So if that's the case, so the Gemara is. So it seems they would not make a bracha. If you could say they could actually separate the tithe from this food, just to bring you up to date. We're talking about food bought from a non-educated Jew. And there's a concern that the non-educated Jew did not take off maaser. Therefore, the rabbis, it's called dimai. Dimai is like it's like an act. It's called an acronym. It has two words in it. Da mai. What is this? What happened here? What's the history? Was maaser taken off or not? We don't know. Did the guy that sold me, the uneducated Jew that sold me, did he take off the maaser? So I'm supposed to take off the maaser. And now we're saying, but when I can even take off the maaser when I'm not dressed properly. I can even do that. And the Gemara's question is going to be, we just said that on rabbinic law, you say a bracha, right? We said a rabbinic mitzvah, lighting a menorah, you say a bracha before you light a menorah, correct? But the Gemara is saying, if it's true, and the Gemara was, if it's true that a rabbinic, so the same way you'll say, you said, you Rabbi so-and-so said, you say a bracha before you light the menorah. And you said, how do you have a right, and what's the bracha you say? Asher kiddushanu mitzvotav. You say Hashem commanded us because through the rabbis, the Torah said, listen to the rabbis. So therefore, because the Torah said, listen to the rabbis, therefore you have a right to say the bracha that God commanded us to do it. Where did God command us to do Hanukkah? Hanukkah menorah happened after the Torah was given. Because God said, listen to the rabbis, so therefore it's Hashem commanded us to do it. Because Hashem said, what the rabbis tell you to do it. But if that's the case, and therefore the Gemara says, we have a right to say the bracha. If that's to say a blessing, if that's the case, so you should say a blessing when you take off when you buy the food from the uneducated Jew, which the rabbi said you need to separate the tithe, because maybe the uneducated Jew did not take off. So you should also need to say a what? A blessing for this rabbinic law. So rabbinic law to separate, because we're afraid maybe then the seller didn't take off the maaser. So you should have to say. So if that's the case, you should have to say a blessing. And it seems that you don't say a blessing, because it says you can even separate it when you're not dressed properly. So that means you're not saying a blessing. If you're not saying a blessing there, so you should not be saying. Therefore, maybe you have no right to say a blessing on a rabbinic law. Maybe you have no right to say Asher kiddushanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu. Maybe you have no right to say that type of blessing that God commanded us. Maybe you could have rabbinic blessings. You want to say a blessing. You want to thank Hashem. Shelo asani goy, Shelo asani oven, Shelo asani whatever blessing. That's a blessing of praise. That maybe the Gemara is not challenging. You want to say rabbinic blessings, that's fine. But to say, and you want to say a blessing on Torah law, before you tie your tefillin, you say a blessing, fine, no problem. But to say a blessing on rabbinic law, we see that's the Gemara's question. You said you say a blessing that God commanded us on this rabbinic law through the rabbis. That's God's commandment. But it seems that you don't make a blessing on rabbinic law by the fact that you don't have to say you will not say a blessing by the demai, by the food that you bought from an uneducated Jew. Is that clear? So that's the Gemara's challenge.
But why is the Gemara asking this? You give tzedakah without making a blessing. You do tashmish with your wife without a blessing. Those are commandments, and you do them without blessing. So there are other examples of of doing mitzvahs without blessings.
Right, because all those examples that you said, Nathan, the question is asked, why don't you say a blessing before you give tzedakah to the poor person? Right? One of the examples that you said as well. So those are biblical mitzvot, and we don't say blessings. So there are answers to those questions, but the Gemara is just lining up rabbinic, and the Gemara did not see a distinction. In your cases, we know, why don't you say a blessing? You're about to give the poor person money, so you should say a blessing before you give him the money. So one answer is, you know, he might refuse the money, he might decline the money, and therefore the blessing will be in vain. That's one approach. There's another approach, mitzvot that are logical, that a person would on his own possibly do. Let's say giving charity to somebody, honoring your parents. The Torah tells us to give charity. I believe there's the nation of Israel does unbelievable in that mitzvah, right? Above many other people in the world. And they do it in a different way because Hashem commanded us. But we don't see Asher Kiddishanu. I'm coming to you 1 second. Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvotav. That God has sanctified us with His mitzvot. So the Aruch HaShulchan, I think, says that's not. The rabbis didn't feel that you would say that blessing on a mitzvah that's logical, because that you don't see as much that this was something that there's something unique in its act, that this is something that Hashem gave us, that it's so unique. The blessing is more for things that were not as you would not have done it on your own. You would not have put a tefillin on your own. You would not have make a mezuzah on your own. So those are the type of things but something that's more logical, which you might not see superficially, the whole, the godliness of it, that it's unique to Judaism. So maybe they did not say you say a blessing on it. But of course, you would do that mitzvah, even those logical mitzvahs, you do it like the pasuk says, Kabir et avicha v'etim, honor your parents, kasher siviticha, like I commanded you. Meaning you're doing it because not just because of your logic, do it because I commanded you. I'll just tell a little story. I had somebody that I know, his parents got divorced when he was very young. Maybe, so the father once came over to me and he said, my son, does not give me the divorce, and it doesn't give me the honor, the kibbut of the aim, doesn't really honor me, and I said to the father, your son was dealt very difficult cards. He didn't have his father in his life from the time he was maybe whatever age. I didn't excuse the son, but the father, I want the father to be a little bit more understanding, and the father said, you comforted me. But at the end of the day, Hashem commanded that son, when he becomes bar mitzvah, he has a Torah obligation to honor his father. Even if his father is not in his life, even if his father divorced his mother when he was a little child, he has an obligation to honor his parents. That's like Hashem's commandment. You might not come to it. Logically, you might not say it so much, how much meaning his obligation to honor his father is just like the obligation to honor his mother in such a situation. You might not have said that logically, but I'm just giving you a type of extreme example that you see how the difference is. If it's because Hashem commanded you, you would do something different than the logic over there. But the idea is it's certain mitzvot which are not as open that you see that this was given by God, and therefore maybe we might not say a bracha on it. And of course, it is given by God, and we got to do it for that purpose. Yes. You wanted to say something, or wanted to ask something?
No, as far as the Maaseh is only done in land of Israel.
So in the land of Israel, think produce that grew in Israel. But also, we spoke of before, if that produce comes to America, you have an issue with it. Okay. So the Gemara says, Ubein hashmashot. Also, you could go ahead and separate bein hashmashot. You could go ahead and what's bein hashmashot? Bein hashmashot is twilight, between sunset, after sunset and dark, right? And Seta Kochavim. So that area might be Shabbat, might not be Shabbat yet, right? Therefore, we are very strict. Once the sun comes down, we don't do any work, right? On Friday when the sun comes down. Well, because that might be it's a suffix there right there. It might be Shabbat. And if a person does work at that time, he's violating the Shabbat. But also, on the other end, when Saturday afternoon, we don't do work until it's dark, right? We don't do work until it's dark. We don't say Shabbat is over when the sun goes down, because maybe it's still Shabbat until all the way. Maybe Shabbat extends all the way. The day goes all the way until the evening, and therefore you can't do any work until it's nighttime. But during this twilight period, this Bein Hashmashot, they said that even though you can't separate tevel, if you have produce that definitely did not take off the maaser, if definitely you did not take off the tithe, you would not be able to separate at that time. But because it looks like you're fixing something and has appearance of fixing, because it's not able to, because by separating you're making it ready to be used. But the Mai, since most uneducated Jews do separate maaser, so therefore the rabbis were lenient on during this twilight time. You could actually take off some of separate the tithe on that demai. But on Shabbat itself, they were not lenient. So the Gemara says, the Gemara says, if amid kol midrabana by bracha, then we say mafrishanato arum uben. Now, if you say kol midrabanan, if you say, good morning, Joseph. Good morning. Welcome back. If you say kol midrabanan, Mr. Safra's here. Shechianu. If you say kol midrabanan, if you say every drabanan boi bracha, every rabbinic obligation that the rabbi's mitzvah they enacted needs a blessing, so if he's not dressed, how could you say a bracha not dressed? The pasuk said your camp has to be holy, and you can't see a nakedness of when you speak. We trans, that's how we darshan, we expound on it. Erval davar, that even dibur, that you can't speak, mention Hashem's name, you can't say facing a nakedness, vileka. And so therefore, it's clear if you're able to, there's no bracha on the demai. If there's no bracha on the demai, so why is there a bracha on lighting the Hanukkah? There's also rabbinic law. So the Gemara answers, Amar Baye, Vaday de devrei by bracha. When it's a definite rabbinic, when some Vaday de devrei mitzvah that the rabbis instituted because something which is not out of doubt. They instituted because they said you got to light a Hanukkah menorah. That's not out of doubt. You have to light a Hanukkah. If there's that you say Asher Kiddush Shalom Mitzvotav. But a mitzvah that was only enacted out of doubt, but they weren't sure, because you're not sure if the person separated the maaseh or not, that type of mitzvah, the rabbis did not enact a blessing for. He did not tell you to say a blessing on that type of mitzvah. Like Nathan was asking before, Rabbi, there are exceptions. You don't say blessings all the time. You're right, and that's what the Gemara is now saying. The Gemara is saying Nathan's answer by saying there's something unique and different about mine that the rabbis will not enact a blessing, Asher Kiddushanam Mitzvotav. They themselves said we're not, even though it's an enactment, even though you need to do it, we're not enacting the obligation to say this bracha because this whole mitzvah was only created out of a doubt to protect the person. But a mitzvah that was not created because of a doubt. This was created because we feel that this needs to be done because we want people to remember the great miracle of Hanukkah. So being that's the case with Moni Charles, therefore you have to say a blessing on such a mitzvah. To be continued. Now tomorrow we're looking at morning, 7:45. Is that good? Because it's 7:30 and 8:30 minute tomorrow. Is a 7:45 good? Simon, would that work? Would that? Okay. Anybody? We're looking for 7:45 tomorrow. No, I think it's a quarter. We're get a little extra. People get a little later start.
Quick question.
You're here, Ralph. Would that work for you?
I don't know what time my minyan starts. It's usually
Okay.
7:45.
I think they're going to make it later tomorrow, Ralph, in honor of July 4th.
I'll find out. I'm going to go there now.
Be in touch. Yes.
Right, quick question. So,
Yes.
but the taking of the 2% for the Kohen and the taking of the 10% is obligatory on the farmer or on the seller. On the obligatory person, is there a bracha? I'm not talking about on a non-obligatory person who's a buyer.
Oh, hold on one second. You help Mr. Haber. I'll put it away. Simon, you'll help Mr. Haber with the Talis Tefillin? I'm sorry about that, Nathan. I just wanted to, say that again.
So on the 2% to the Kohen and the 10% to the Levi, that's obligatory on the farmer. It's obligatory on the seller. Is there a bracha on the obligatory person, not on the buyer who's not obligatory and there's a safek, but on the obligatory farmer seller?
I would definitely think so, but I will get back. I'm gonna check that out. Definitely should be.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome. I'll get back to you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Hey, have a great day, Ralph.
You too.